very much, Matthew Keeley, for that very challenging address. Now, our next speaker will be Dr. Helen Pringle. Dr. Helen Pringle, from the School of Social Sciences and International Studies at the University of New South Wales, has degrees from Princeton University and the ANU. Helen's main research interests are in political theory with a focus on the 17th and the 19th centuries, and in the area of human rights and justice. Helen is working on a project concerning the place of pornography within considerations of free speech, and entitled Practicing Pornography. Helen is also involved in an international research project on ethnography and sexual slavery in early colonial Queensland. Dr. Pringle is a contributor to the recently published book Big Porn Incorporated, edited by Melinda Tankard-Rice and published by Spinifex Press on September the 6th, 2011. That's quite recent. So I'd like you to welcome Dr. Helen Pringle, please.
Thank you, David, and thank you for having me here. So it is a beautiful room, built on the land of the Gayawara Nation. I just wanted to correct one little note there. The book that I contributed to is called Big Porn Inc. Sorry, I'm bringing it along today, Big Porn Incorporated. And it's edited by Melinda Tankard-Rice and by Abigail Bray as well. So there are two editors there. And I have three chapters in the book. One of the chapters bears on what I'm going to talk a little bit tonight. One of the chapters actually mentions the story of a student at my university. I'll call him Marcus. Since the age of 10, Marcus has been, or had been, accessing pornography sites, and at some point he started accessing child pornography sites. These were not sites with pictures of babies in bathtubs, which is the common kind of cry of people, that that's what we'll be regulating next. But the material that he accessed had a combined rating of 10, which is the highest rating that's given in classifying child pornography sites. I won't go into it. The records are open of his court case, but they involve children as young as 2 screaming in pain at being sexually assaulted, bestiality, and so forth. I've called him by the name Marcus because that's his name, and that's the name, his first name, that was given in the open court documents that record his prosecution and conviction for possession of child abuse materials. The psychological report of Marcus that was prepared for the court here noted that in New South Wales noted that he displayed little insight and little affect regarding the charges that he'd been put on, possibly because he'd been viewing pornography for nearly a decade, as I said, since the age of 10. What excited Marcus was not just cruelty, but sexual cruelty. The psychologist who was commissioned to give a report, and he indicated that he was not a paedophile in the sense that he had abused or even wanted to abuse children whom he knew. And in that sense, some writers might say, and some writers do say, that Marcus's crime was victimless. He didn't make the images, he didn't record the abuse of children, he didn't upload the images, he simply downloaded them and watched them. This view that his crime was in some sense victimless is actually a fairly widely held view amongst my academic colleagues. The view that simply watching, reading or masturbating to pornography is at least comparatively harmless, that it doesn't harm anyone. There's no identifiable victim in actually just watching what is already there. The harm is in the making, in other words. In fact, some of Marcus's cache of materials will include cartoon pornography that was produced without the use of identifiable children at all. Marcus's case is not that exceptional. The myth that such offending is rare is quickly dispelled by the other cases, even in Marcus's case, that are cited by the judge when he talks about what would be appropriate sentencing for this young man. I also believe that the case of Marcus is not that exceptional, but reveals to us something really important about the culture in which our children are growing up, in which parents, some of us, I'm not sure if all of us are parents are doing their best to raise their children. What I want to do today this evening is to talk about pornography as a cultural and a social phenomenon. In the legal sense, I define pornography much more strictly and narrowly as a form of sexual vilification along similar lines to how racial and homosexual vilification is defined in the New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Act, where vilification is seen as a form of discrimination and subordination. But this evening, when I'm talking about the challenges for children on the internet, I want to use the term in a much broader sense, in a much vaguer way, to cover a wider area of sexually explicit material, very simply, the material that our children are likely to encounter on the internet. So in that broader sense, that broader catching of what I'm talking about, I think there are two important things to note about pornography as a cultural phenomenon today. First, it's become more mainstream, and second, it's become more hardcore. As my friends Rebecca Wisnant and Gail Dine say, this is no longer your father's Playboy we're talking about here. When boys get off these days on pornography, it's not a blonde girl with fingers stuck in the mouth and faraway looking eyes on a Playboy cover. That's not what young children are accessing today. Instead, for young people growing up today, it's almost impossible to avoid contact with what in our childhood, my childhood, would have been unimaginable. There's no question that the internet plays an important role here, through sheer accessibility and anonymity of access. The avoidance of the need for adult surveillance and even for adult control. The sort of surveillance, sort of routine everyday surveillance that you have in a news agency, for example, where you actually have to take the magazine up to the person at the cashier, who would then presumably wave it around and say, "Joan, how much is this one?" And then you'd be sitting there. But I'm talking about even that routine sort of surveillance that you used to have, is now absent. It's now common for even very young children to have contact with hardcore pornography, and by hardcore, let me indicate what I mean by that as well. When I was writing this talk, I remembered an opinion piece by a colleague of mine who was pro-pornography, in which she talked about one of her son's contact with PornTube, which is a popular internet site of amateur porn. Well, then I started to wonder, was it RedTube? And I wanted to be accurate in my talk, so I googled the name of my colleague, plus PornTube. And the top sites that I had were ones that had open access to women's bodies, all sorts of parts of women's bodies, and to videos of forceful sex. It's not in any way difficult to find hardcore pornography on the net. By the way, I didn't find my colleague's opinion piece, so I can't tell you. That simply didn't come up on the first 3 pages of the Some writers think that this accessibility of pornography is actually not necessarily a bad thing either. That is because it's argued that pornography acts as a form of sex education. And I couldn't agree more. That's exactly what it is, and exactly what it does. Marcus, my student, for example, had learned about sex from the internet, and that's exactly why I'm concerned about pornography in regard to young people on the internet. From my perspective, the type of sexually explicit material that's easy to find on the internet does educate boys and girls about what sex is, how they should do it, what they should expect their partners to do, and what they should expect it to be like. And the primary concern I have here is not about purity or virginity or anything else like that. Rather, what this material does, in my view, is to make inequality erotic, to give subordination a kick. That's in my view. But when boys masturbate to pornography these days on the internet, they get off on inequality. So, in other words, yes, I agree, pornography teaches, there's no question of it. And what it teaches, in my view, is that inequality and dominance are exciting. It's also, I think, ludicrous to think that young people don't learn from and imitate what they see and what they view. The whole advertising industry is built on the notion that adults, as well as children, will imitate what they see. That they'll try to be like what is presented as beautiful, attractive, cool, sexy. And if you don't think that children imitate very literally what they see, just Google, for example, on YouTube, "Baby hit me one more time," and plus a child's age. So "Baby hit me one more time" plus 3-year-old, "Baby hit me one more time" plus 2-year-old, "Baby hit me one more time" plus 1-year-old. And check out the videos of babies imitating Britney Shields, first with their bodies before they can even speak, and later also with their voices singing along and slapping themselves in the back as they do. As a young girl, I learned to kiss boys from the movies. That's how I learned to do that, and I learned that long before I ever kissed one. When I did kiss one, he asked me what I was doing, throwing my head back like that and being in that rather sort of odd position. That's where I learned how to do that. I practiced throwing my head back in front of the mirror because I thought that was how people kissed. Today, young people learn how to have sex from the internet, from the movies that they see. Young people's understanding and experience of sex, but also their understanding of gender and sexuality more broadly, are increasingly shaped by what they or their peers observe in pornography. Sex is no longer hidden away. I know many of my university colleagues like to think of our society as sexually repressed and Puritan, that our society is populated by Helen Lovejoys, running around talking, throwing their arms around and asking what about the children. Perhaps our society was like that in the 1950s, although I do a lot of family history and I'm not actually convinced that that was the case even then. Not in my family anyway. But certainly it's no longer the case. And the careful work of researchers like Michael Flood in particular indicates that young people in Australia are as much a part of this phenomenon of porn sex as anywhere else. In a 2006 study of Australian students aged between 13 and 16, it was found that 93% of men, young men, and 62% of girls had seen pornography online. They don't even have to go looking for it. A couple of years ago, for example, I mistyped Google. I mistyped Google with an F at the end instead of an E. And the cascade of self-titled rape sites started downloading themselves onto my screen unbidden. It was rather strange and peculiar. I think it's been fixed now. I often find in my downloads folder, for example, clips from hardcore videos, including bestiality, and I have no idea of memory how they got there. I think they were probably attached to all those Cialis and Viagra emails that you get. I'm not quite sure. I really have no idea how they got there. Michael Flood and Clive Hamilton report that 84% of boys and 60% of girls that I've just talked about report having been accidentally exposed to internet sex sites, presumably in much the same way as I am. Mistyping a letter, for example. But sites explicitly devoted to it aren't the only contact point with pornography for young people today. Advertisements, billboards, music videos are also conduits, as are other young people who may be more adventurous in their porn scavenging. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that we live in a porn culture. It's not a separate realm anymore, the realm of pornography, as it used to be in the days of our father's Playboy. By porn culture, I don't just mean a sexualised culture, but rather a culture where the way things are sexualised is through a porn aesthetic. I wince at some of the t-shirts I see young people wearing today. I wince at some of the stories I hear young people tell, with, like Martha's, little insight and little affect. For example, my favourite neighbourhood restaurant has communal tables, and recently I was sitting next to two young girls of about 15 or 16 who discussed, in my hearing, the story of a friend of theirs who went to the toilet at the club and was followed in there by a man who locked the door and then told the girl that he knew she really wanted it. As I left the restaurant, and much against the wishes of my son, I should say, much to the horror of my son, I said to one of the girls, very kindly I think, "Excuse me, you realise you were describing a crime, but what you described in that little story was a crime from the moment the man locked the door behind him." The girls' t-shirts were branded with Playboy insignia and their faces were completely blank. I didn't stop to look back. I can imagine what sort of signs they made at me behind my back. I got an earful from my son as well. Apart from this mainstreaming, the sex of pornography has become rather more hardcore, as I said, more aggressive and often more violent. Again, here if I can use an example from my own experience, when I first read Pornland by Gail Dines last year, I found it very difficult to credit her claims on this score of how pornography had become more hardcore. Who was this Max Hardcore, for example, that she talked about? I'd never heard of him. My Google search for him brought up a video, free to view, no age verification required. The video was of Max having some kind of sexual contact with a girl in a school or uniform. I hesitate to call this sex, as it was basically Max urinating in the girl's mouth. I don't know about you, but if someone asked me what that video was about and asked me to describe it, the word humiliation would come to mind a lot more quickly than the word sex. In the op-ed Google search I noted before, the video still, and I didn't actually look at the video, was of a woman with 3 penises coming at her. I don't think we're any longer talking about mutuality here. And the porn industry itself makes no secret of what it's about. According to the award-winning porn star Anthony Hardwood, the names are never subtle, what he calls the customers want a scene where you have to be very rough with the girl and take charge. Now, I acknowledge that a lot of pornography is not made for profit, but for sharing. It's amateur, for sharing. Like children used to swap trading cards of football stars. But there's also still a huge market for paid pornography, which is probably more adult-oriented. I also, of course, acknowledge that there are many different scenarios in pornography, that it includes, for example, genres of disability porn, fat porn, women who look like they're in charge porn, and so forth. But I think the dominant message of pornography, as I see it, is the man's got to have it with aggression or forcefulness by the man with his penis and subservience by the woman, or sometimes the man who's penetrated in one way or another. You can say that a message like that reflects society, but it simply reflects the way that society is, and I think that's true in some sense. But that also forms society, and it also informs our society and how we understand who we're in it. In that sense, I think pornography is performative. It performs sex, and it performs sex as inequality. Young people today are more likely to have pornography before they have sex. The median age of first encounter with pornography is 11. The median age of having sex with another person is 16. Young people today usually have sex with or via an image long before they have sex with another person. Again, I want to emphasise here, because some people accuse those who are opposed to pornography of this. I have nothing against sex. I don't think it's evil or sinful in itself. And sexual curiosity and experimentation are quite unremarkable, if rather wonderful parts of growing up. But I don't think pornography actually fosters sexual curiosity or intimate exploration. It fosters instead a fairly monological model of sex based around inequality. Young people's expectations and practices are increasingly shaped by an image of sex that's deliberately painful and violating. The sexual scripts that young people are learning today and imitating are not ones that place a high value on respect, mutuality, on communication, tenderness, or equality. I hear people say that the problem with pornography is that it's too much about the body. My problem is that it isn't bodily enough. What's missing from pornography, or some of the things that are missing from pornography, is the smell, the taste, the flesh, the touch of intimacy. All that's missing from porn sex. The body is completely gone from it. All that's often missing, all that is so often missing again from what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man, and what it means to have intimate relations in our society. Again, Rebecca Wisner has written about the effects of this porn culture in our world. She writes that the challenge for us today in regard to the internet is to richly imagine and to encourage us to richly imagine another world than the one that we see. One in which no woman or girl is ever again called slut, prude, bitch or dyke. In which no woman, man or child ever has to fear rape or suffer its damage to their spirits. In which men do not control their own and other men's behaviour by the threat of being seen and treated as women. And in which lesbian love and connection is not reduced to a pornographic fetish. In this world that she imagines, every woman in girl sees her own body is beautiful, no man or boy is made to see his body as a weapon, and people take part in sexual activity only when they expect to enjoy it and to be honoured and fulfilled therein. What Wisner is saying here in conclusion is that pornography actually closes off our imagination about what human connection can be. We often identify what we see around us or what we see on the internet or what we settle for as sex and confuse it with what sex could be. That it could be about curiosity and exploration and imagination. In other words, we so often settle for a very cliched sexual language, the dull repetition of programmed sexual fantasy that is the staple of pornography, instead of the rather different, rich and tender language of imagination and curiosity and grace. The American writer James Baldwin, gay and black, writes about how the fleshly experience of that sex offers to us an astonishing grace. He says sex offers to us the experience of being known, being seen and known in all one's awful trouble and shabby dignity, as a witness to what one is and why. The sort of passionate morality that he's talking about there and the wonders of intimacy is what is lost and corrupted in a pornographic world. This is what Marcus and boys like him lost. what they lost to his cost and to our shame as adults in this world. So for me, the challenge of the internet is to get them to imagine another world, one which is richer and honours more clearly the potential of our youth.